Alright guys, I am back. We will get over there in a minute. But what I have done is I moved my gauges and my nitrogen tank over to another unit. I have a second valve core remover tool. To be honest with you, it's not necessary to have two of them unless you're doing like commercial sized units, and I don't even mean rooftop units necessarily, but like big chillers and stuff like that, and you need to pull two vacuums at once from two different hoses. But anyway, that's another story. What I did was I moved my gauges over here and my nitrogen tank over here, and again, I'm just doing an initial pressure test to see if it'll hold at 125 psi. I overshot 100, so I just went to a nice round number, and I get that 125 isn't an odd number. So anyway, what I'm going to do is this tank right now is open, right? But this valve here controls how much psi actually goes into the system. So I am going to keep my phone trained here, but I'm going to open this valve a little bit until I get this up to 200 psi, and then I'm going to leave it for 10 minutes. And by the way, you do that by tightening this valve down. So we're just going to watch that creep all the way up to the 200 mark. Sorry, I had my valve closed off down here. And I actually overshot 200 a little bit because I'm juggling two things at once. So what I'm going to do is go up to 225 because I don't like to be in between hash marks. 225 is just halfway between that 250 and 200. You could go all the way to 200, but I find that's a bit of a waste. Alright, there we go. So I'm going to valve this off. So now nothing can leave. And if you can see, we are right on 225 psi of nitrogen. So we're going to leave that for 10 minutes while I go over here and pull this vacuum. On a normal install, what you would want to do, just to be efficient with your time, because there is a bit of waiting during this process, is while I was waiting on nitrogen to hold and while I was waiting on a vacuum to pull and all that, I'd be doing the electrical in here, the high voltage, low voltage. I'd be cleaning up this wouldn't have already been done. I'd be doing this because if I have a leak, I have to take all this back off, at least to get to the braze. But anyway, we already did all that yesterday. I was pretty confident in my brazes. I guess we'll find out today how confident I am. A couple of things. I'm not going to leave the video running too much while this thing's actually on because it's very loud. You won't be able to hear me anyway. But what I'm going to do first is I am going to valve this off right here. And what that's going to do is allow the vacuum to pull a vacuum up to this point. And then I'm going to open this up to where it's at now, and it's going to pull a vacuum through the hose up to here. And then I'm going to open this up and allow it to start pulling a vacuum. And while it's doing that, I'm going to have this gas ballast here open. Your vacuum pump may or may not have one, but I'm going to have this gas ballast open until it gets down to around 3,000 microns on my gauge. Once it gets down there, I'm going to close off this gas ballast, and I'm going to kind of wiggle this valve a few times and wiggle this valve a few times just to get any air left inside of those two valves out of the system, air, water, anything non-condensable. And then I'm going to wait until this pulls below 500 microns, and then I'll turn the phone back on. But my real goal is to get it below 250, maybe even 200 microns. And I'm going to let it pull, and since I'm pulling from the low side or from the far side of the system, this vacuum is actually going to be lower than the vacuum over here, because this is where the vacuum's coming from, going inside, coming outside, and this is where I'm reading it at. So once I valve it off, typically what happens is this number actually lowers instead of rises. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to valve this off. Oh, I should mention, these vacuum pumps take oil. You can see it in that sight glass right there. These vacuum pumps take oil, and after you've used it a few times, you're supposed to change it. and I have some in the truck, but just to see if it's still pulling a vacuum well. As you can see, my pump is rated for 15 microns. So what you do is you hook your micron gauge to this 1/4 inch port right here, and then pull a vacuum on it and make sure it can get down to 15 microns. If it can't, either your pump is bad or your oil is bad. Most likely your oil, but just a side note. But anyway, so I've got this valved off here. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the vacuum pump on, and then I'm gonna let it run through the system, open up that, and then I'm going to turn on my micron gauge. And during all that, you're not going to be able to hear me, so I'm not even going to try to talk. And then once I see this start reporting, I'll turn it off until we get down to 500 microns. But typically on a residential system with this kind of setup, it takes me less than 15 minutes a lot of the time. But now it's a wet day, so maybe there's a lot of moisture in that system, but we will see. So let's get her fired up here. You can see the pump gets a lot quieter when you close off the gas ballast. We're pulling pretty quick here, so I'm just going to record the whole time. We're already down to 800 microns and dropping 750. Almost to 500, which is kind of our maximum that we want to pull, or our minimum that we want to pull down to, sorry. Most guys will just pull to 500 and call it good. I'm just a bit OCD, so I like to keep going. And as you can see, that pulled down to 500 microns extremely fast. So number one, I feel pretty good about our brazes already. But number two, that just shows you the difference between having this kind of hose setup, pulling your valve core. I know it's a little bit more time consuming than just using your gauges, but it works. I'm going to try and get down to 250. I don't want to let it run too long with the video running. Although, as you can see, it's clearly capable of going much lower than that. And again, the whole time I'm doing this, this is my waiting period on that other system to see if it'll hold nitrogen. If it will, that's what kind of gives you the go-ahead to pull a vacuum on it. At 250, I'm going to let it go a little bit lower, and then I'm going to valve it off. I mean, if it'll go to 200, I'm going to let it do it. It's still moving. Sometimes this will stall out, and you'll only have one number change every few seconds. But this is still pulling down relatively quickly. almost there. I know it's been a long video, but really the vacuum portion of it's only been about 3 minutes, I think. So we're at 200 now. I'm going to go ahead and valve that off, but I'm going to keep it trained here so you can see what happens. So the system's completely valved to itself now at about 192 microns, and you see how it's still dropping. I know the vacuum pump's still running, but I can turn this off, and that's not going to change anything because I valved the system off. So look, we're still pulling down, and that's a good sign, by the way, if it's still pulling down. Typically, if you close off that valve and it immediately starts rising, that's because you've broken your connection to the vacuum pump, and there was air or moisture trapped in this system that's being released. Worst case scenario, you have a tiny leak that's allowing air and moisture into the system. So as you can see, we're at 180 microns. I'm going to make sure that holds for about another 5 or 10 minutes, but I'm going to be honest with you, it's probably going to hold. And just before I end the video, we're going to go check on the system over here and see if it's holding its nitrogen pressure. I did not braze this system, so I'm really relying on the numbers here. And as you may or may not be able to see, we are still right where we want to be, 225 psi. So honestly, it's only been about 5 minutes, I think, that's been holding, so that's still got to wait another 5 minutes. We pulled a vacuum faster than we could test with nitrogen. So we'll check this thing one more time. It has risen a little bit. You can see down there at the bottom the delta T over the course of the last minute. It has risen 10 microns, now down to 9 over the course of a minute. So I'm going to wait until that kind of stops moving, and as long as it's still below my 250 mark, I'm fine with that. But anyway, that's how you pull a vacuum on a system. Quick tip: if this were to rapidly rise, it could be that you don't have everything valved off correctly. I have done that in the past. I left that valve open. Or if you have a loose connection, either here or at any of these connectors here or over here, like I said, some things like that. But otherwise, worst case scenario, we're down to only a delta T of 6 for the minute. But like I said, worst case scenario, you have a bad braze somewhere, maybe with a pinhole leak or something. Kind of starts with just making sure that when you're brazing, you get a good amount of braze in the joint and then top cap it a little bit. Honestly, I could have top capped a little bit more on some of these, but it was very windy. I just wanted to get it done, and it was getting ready to rain. So anyway, I think we did fine. We are down to a change of only 6 over the course of the minute, and we still haven't even gotten to 200 microns yet. So all right, have a good one.